Well, some of you know where I shop, because I've seen you there. It's at the great place of Winco on 82nd. I think a number of us, every once in a while when I go in there, I always see parishioners, and sometimes they're surprised to see me because I'm not dressed as a priest, I'm just getting groceries. But I'd probably say we probably do about 90% of our shopping there. Now that Stephen Coucher's here, and he's from the East Coast, and they don't have Winco on the East Coast. And he is getting an experience. Because you know when you go to Winco on 82nd, it's always an adventure. And sometimes I'll hear 2, 3, maybe 4 languages spoken. But as you know, when you go to Winco, there's the Winco parking lot. And there's a lot of people who suffer who are there, aren't there? We go by them. Or you think of the people on 82nd, right? And as I found out very early on as pastor here, from what people say, you can get anything on 82nd. And come to find out later too is that Clackamas Town Center is now one of the major human trafficking hubs on the West Coast. And so, or if you look at the people by the liquor store next to Margarita Factory, or on that creek area on Monterey, you see people who are homeless, mentally ill, addicted, down and out. We pass by them, and I don't know if you ever have this moment. I have it too. It's like you walk by and you think, I think Jesus had a parable about this. I'm pretty sure I'm not just supposed to pass by. But we often don't really know how to help. And to help a person in a meaningful or lasting sort of way. You know, and sometimes that happens on the property here at Christ the King, being this close to 82nd. And when Clackamas County Sheriff has to show up, and they come for the person, and more often than not, they know that person, and they call that person by his or her name. And they're very respectful. And to get them, you know, whatever next thing they need to, even if it's just leaving the property for the time being. Or I think of Monsignor O'Connor downtown at the cathedral, which has so many people who are suffering around in that area of town, and how he knows them all by name and speaks to them often. But most of us have experienced something similar with the suffering, homelessness, from drug addiction, mental illness, lack of love. We see people on the streets and we think, what am I supposed to do here? Do I take them home? Do I give them money? Do I give them food? Do I say a prayer? And we all know people too in less acute situations. People in our family, our coworkers, maybe a client or somebody at school who's been beat up by the world in some fashion. Addiction, despair, anxiety, grief, abuse of some sort. And again, hopefully we're always asking the Lord for guidance. What am I supposed to do? What can I do for this person? And sometimes it's really hard to figure out. Now, when we look at the parable of the Good Samaritan, it offers us some strong challenges, but it also provides an answer to that question. You know, generally we think of the Good Samaritan as a parable of telling us how we should treat people, with maybe a little dig at the priests and those who consider themselves religious. It teaches that our neighbor is not just the people who are in our group, or who are our family or friends or the people we're comfortable with. But rather we are responsible for all those around us. Pope Benedict XVI, in his great encyclical Deus Caritas Est, it's one of the great papal encyclicals of the last 50 years, he says this, he says, the relevance of the parable today is evident. Aren't we surrounded by people who have been robbed and battered? The victims of drugs, of human trafficking, inwardly devastated people who sit empty in the midst of material abundance. All this is of concern to us. It calls us to have the eye and the heart of a neighbor and to have the courage to love our neighbor and to treat them with mercy. If we're going to listen to the parable, what we can't have is indifference. Indifference is against love. Means I don't care, it doesn't even register my attention. That's not love, it's opposed to love. So how do we interpret this passage? You know, in the church, there's always been, if you look at the catechism too, there's like usually 4 ways we look at a passage of Scripture. There's 4 basic interpretations, and they're all interrelated. There's a literal interpretation, that is, what does the text say at its face value? What's the historical, cultural realities that are being expressed here, and all of that. Then there's the allegorical interpretation, that is, what does this passage say about Jesus? Even if it's an Old Testament passage. And then there's the moral interpretation, which means, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to act in light of this word? And then the fourth is what's called the anagogical, is how we understand this in light of heavenly realities. So let's just take this parable and look at it from 2 of the lenses. From the allegorical, what does this passage reveal to us about Jesus Christ? And second, the moral, which is built upon that. How are we supposed to act in response to that? So the fathers of the church, they were really good at this. And so here's how the fathers of the church would look allegorically at this parable. They would ask themselves, we'd ask ourselves, so who's the man that gets beat up and left for dead? They would say, that's us. That's the human race. That's what happens when sin came into the world. It destroyed us. It beat us up. Who are the robbers? That's the devil and his angels who went after us to beat us up and leave us half dead. And that's us laying on the side of the road. And then who's the priest and the Levite? They would say, well, that shows that the old covenant law and sacrifices couldn't help us, couldn't bring that man back to life, pass by on the other side. And then who is the Good Samaritan? I'm sure you know this one. It's Jesus, who came from heaven because he is God and became one of us and bent down to us when we were half dead on the side of the road. He didn't just pass by, but he came to us to suffer and die and to save and to heal us. And they say, well, what is that wine and oil that's poured into his wounds? Those are the sacraments. And then taking them to the innkeeper. Who's the innkeeper? That's the church. You see how beautiful this allegorical interpretation is? It's like all of a sudden, like, boom, this tells us a lot about Jesus. Then what are we supposed to do with that? Moving from the allegorical to the moral. How are we supposed to live? Well, first of all, to realize that we were the man beaten, left dead by the side of the road. What does that mean for us when we watch what Christ did for us as the Good Samaritan? We don't just pass by. We don't just pass by. The command to not just pass by wounded people, which can leave us a little confused and flustered about, well, what is it I'm supposed to do? And the deepest meaning here, of course, is that Jesus is the ultimate healer of the human soul and the human body. But what is my place in that? Because as a member of Christ, I am participating in that work of his. So what am I supposed to do? Well, here's a few things I think we can draw from this. First is, it's a long-term fix. The problems that we see on our streets does not get solved quickly. Why? And I take this from Mark Latia. He's the secular photographer turned journalist, has his YouTube channel, Soft White Underbelly, spent last 10 to 15 years interviewing people from that side of society, and he says this as a secular man. The problem with all of this is a broken family. What's the fix? A dad and a mom with kids, married, who love each other. That's the fix. That doesn't happen quickly. But we should be actively at work as responsible citizens, is that we support that. That we have to, that marriage and family is the solution to these problems. And that we support social policies that will support that and bring that about. And there's this great temptation is that we just have this nanny state. We just pay taxes and the state's going to take care of everything. Well, guess what? The state doesn't do a good job of that because they can't. It's too remote. It's too far away. And they do it in a wasteful, expensive sort of way. For almost the entire history of the United States, you know who took care of those in need? Religious people, churches. They're much more on the local level. It's what we call subsidiarity and solidarity. And that the churches should be encouraged and supported and to do that work and not to leave it to the state whereby I can kind of like, I'm absolved of my personal responsibility. So there's a long-term fix. The second is this. We don't support dysfunctional situations. Love is tender, but it's also tough. And sometimes I don't give somebody what they want, I give them what they need. And sometimes it's helping a person to make different choices, maybe choices they don't want to make. That's part of it too. We don't enable dysfunctional situations. Third is when we have these encounters, we're encountering a beloved son or daughter of God. And you know what? What I've learned after being a priest for 27 years and knowing a lot of stories, don't judge their hearts. You don't know. And whenever I've heard somebody's story who's down and out, at the end of it, I like, of course this is why you are the way you are. Of course. Because you know what? Some people in life, they don't get any breaks, ever, from the time they were born. And so we don't judge their hearts. We have compassion. Next, we can always give respect and love. Eye contact, a smile. That's what I learned from the missionaries of charity. You can always give that. That costs nothing. And you know what it does is that it recognizes the human dignity of that other person. A person who so often is ignored, who doesn't get the attention from anyone, who never gets talked to in a respectful sort of way. We can always give love and respect. And then we can be generous with our time and our finances to support those works that actually do help people, that don't enable dysfunctional situations, but to make those dollars count for something that really will make a difference, even if it takes a long time. And that we practice the works of mercy. That's what, in our pastoral vision here at Christ the King, that's one of our priorities, the works of mercy, the spiritual and the corporal works of mercy. And one of the great corporal works of mercy that we do here at Christ the King is our St. Vincent de Paul food pantry and support. Knowing ultimately about this parable is that Jesus, the Son of God, alone can save and heal people. But he does it in and through us, the members of his body. And you know what the most important work is for any human being? Is to get them to meet Jesus Christ. That's what every human heart longs for, no matter how much money or how much you are on the street. We all need Jesus Christ, and so as members of Christ, we ask ourselves, what is the next step? How can I help this person make that one step closer towards Christ in this encounter with them right now? To let him examine their wounds and provide healing and restoration through his sacraments, to lead them to his church, who can care for them and nourish them with the truths of the gospel. Right? This is not a quick fix, but it is a call to encounter and to bring the light of Christ to everyone that we meet. Jesus was the Good Samaritan for us, and we follow him. And so we don't just walk on by.